have immune systems that will get acute illnesses, yes, we will do that. In order to mature our immune system to make it very strong. We're not supposed to have heart attacks. We're not supposed to have cancer. We're not supposed to have diabetes. We're not supposed to be overweight. And we're not supposed to start the aging process until we're about 100 years of age. Did everyone hear that? Who didn't hear that? Please. We have those studies. We even really do. But it's our fault. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how the human body actually repairs itself and give you the real tools in order to undo what just happened over here from Fukushima. Because this is a total disaster here for the West Coast. We'll be seeing this in a few minutes. I can tell you this, that we repair at no less than 800 quadrillion times a second. When we are healthy at the age of 25, we basically repair all these amazing mistakes that take place just through normal living. It's that we need to stay focused on. What herb, what vitamin, what drug, what homeopathic remedy can repair at 800 quadrillion times a second? Does anybody know of anyone that can do that? Any herb? There isn't. The human body does. What we need to do is very simple. We need to replicate what for 5,000 years the longest lived individuals from cultures across the world have done to keep that system online. And when they do, they don't start aging until the age of 100. At the worst, at the age of 90. They start at the age of 90. So I'm going to dedicate this next little story to these two right here in the front who have been working in the field of helping people to deal with different kinds of traumas and get them out so we can heal. Back in the late 70s, I just got done being a world-class swimmer and had lost my health and was trying to recover. And there were two medical schools at Michigan State University where I was attending. They couldn't help me. Well, one thing led to another. I started doing a lot of reading, and next thing I know, I'm on a plane going to Finhorn. Does anyone here hear of Finhorn? Okay, good. Well, when I was over there at Finhorn, they had us as a group. Most of us were scientists. There were some business people in a group of about 50. And we would sit at the evening meal in a rotation fashion, so we would get a chance to meet different residents of Finhorn. And there's this one ideal British postcard couple. Beautiful white set of hair, not a wrinkle on their face, rosy cheeks, and they were just beautiful. They were in love with each other. And it was about a week before I could sit at their table, because as I said, we rotate in groups. Well, finally, when I sat at their table, they had been well rehearsed. They had been saying this story that I'm going to tell you now here for a long time. We began to talk about them, and they said that 5 years ago, they were living in the retirement center right next to Finhorn. And that they had been an official member of the community, and that eating the food of the community, had been living the restful, peaceful lifestyle of the community for about 5 years. And they asked me to guess their age. And that, I thought I knew. I thought they were 70. So I said, I think you're 65. And they smiled. And he pulled out a picture. And I'll never forget looking at this Polaroid picture. Both of them were over like this. One was with a cane, the other one had pretty thick glasses on. And I looked at them, and it looked like one set of parents to these two. But I couldn't figure out which.
No worries. No worries. I'll
set
it up for
I sat
you.
there with my mouth open saying, because I didn't want to, what do I say? Whose parent was it? These people looked like they were 95 years of age. And I said, I don't know. They look like one of your parents, but I don't know which side. And they smiled. And they said, that was us 5 years ago. I said, it can't be. They said, yeah, it was. They reached out into their pocket, pulled out their British driver's licenses. They were 95 years of age. Changed my life. It can be done. They knew how to do it. And then I realized it had been in the literature now since 1930, how to do this. Well, I was writing a book on cancer when I saw that the same principle, regenerating the body to take out the cancer, when I saw Fukushima blow. I went, oh my gosh, I have to stop and write on Fukushima now, because that radiation we have to get out of our system in order for the regeneration effect to take place. That's why I'm here right now. All right, everyone, so wow, you put in the wrong slideshow. That's last year's. It's on that, the MBS USB. It's labeled March 2012. Finally. Yes. Mid north of Scotland, northern Scotland. And who knows how to put do you know how to? Yeah, please help. Yeah. Sorry, everyone. I've been doing this for a few years here at the show. Sorry.
I gave it back to him.
And this was just after Fukushima had blown. Yeah. Okay. He give it back. He did. I was talking and I didn't know. Sorry. It's March 2012. Should say final. Or should say final.
Fukushima thing?
Just for your information, when you get ready to leave here today, the part of what we're going to do about regenerating this whole planet, if we can, we have announcements on this. Sorry. Do A. There we go. You got it. Thank you. And also for the Linda, that little box is up. We're, so for the regeneration part of this lecture, we just covered the intro and we'll get into a little bit at the very end. It can be as simple as doing 60 to 80 minutes first thing in the morning. It doesn't matter if you're in bed. We have ways in which that if you are out of shape, you can still start to turn on that system again that regenerates the body. And we also use smoothies. So you can just, there's great products here. You can just get the ingredients, and with an excellent blender, you can just blend it together so it tastes good. So you can drink a smoothie 3 times a day. And with the 60-minute to 80-minute time period, first thing in the morning, and then the 3 smoothies throughout the day, and changing your diet appropriately. People are eating a pretty good diet. Then the spin-horn experience, this regeneration effect can be yours. So we talk about that on both flyers. But specifically to this lecture, there's a book now that I've written that will have a picture of at the very end. In fact, I think it's over here. There you go. And I knew that we were going to have a lot of detractors come after us. They already have. And so I put in a little over 800 references in there, close to 500 peer reviews, and about little under 100 authoritative references. Really hard to debunk the book now. So this is what is being distilled down into for your benefit right here. This dome has just come out. It deals with what I call the bending of science. We don't have a problem, a political problem here in this country. Nothing wrong with our Constitution. But we have a problem with this cronyism. Whether it's crony socialism or it's crony capitalism, it ain't about free enterprise. And so we have all these groups that infiltrate the government, take over the official regulation agencies like the FDA or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or the USDA, if you know about gene-modified organisms. And they just ramrod this stuff through on the American taxpayer dollar. That's our problem. As you can see, California got hit the worst in the nation. We know 11 weeks out from Fukushima, 11 weeks out from March 16th of this past year, that there was a 35% increase in infant death here on the West Coast, above and beyond expected norms. Vancouver, Canada had a 60% increase in infant death. Philadelphia was next. They had a 48% increase in infant death rate. We now know from the subsequent publication coming off the Centers for Disease Control data that across the board, we saw no less than 14,500 needless deaths that likely occurred, most likely occurred, as a direct result of Fukushima. That data has to take 3 years to go through the final tabulations through the Centers for Disease Control. But when this has been done before, as with Chernobyl, where there were 16,500 people that died directly in the U.S. from Chernobyl, the chances of that occurring from any other possibility, from any other variable, was less than 1 in 1 billion. In my book, that means that Chernobyl was a direct agent of that, of those excess deaths. We'll show that in a slide in a moment. The first thing I want to talk to you about is that if anybody was watching the web, there were these screens of computer simulations of these 3 different types of gases that were coming over from Fukushima. They were in beautiful colors and everything. And it showed just this massive amount of xenon, radioactive noble gas that's not thought to cause any harm, but it does. And the amount of xenon that hit this part of the country in California was 40,000 times above average. Well, what that means is that any of these radioactive particles that can turn gaseous, such as tritium, such as kryptonium, and also iodine. There's also sulfur and chlorine. That's what was also hitting here on the West Coast. The problem is that we're only told about 1 or 2 elements, when really there's probably close to 100. We know there was 80 from Chernobyl. We have that documented. So when we were told that there was radiation coming in, how many people were thinking about taking iodine for that? How can iodine take on 80 other different elements? It can't, can it? So it's a real problem, but see, the government's not telling us this. Now, there are some really good people that work for the government, but their job depends upon them pulling the party line. And some of those good people in government knew from the Chernobyl incident that if you took kelp, it can pull out massive amounts of different kinds of radioactive particles from the body. We knew that from the children that recovered from Chernobyl. There's also edible clays. There's a product called edible earth that helps pull out an enormous number of these radioactive particles. And kelp also contains iodine, so it helps to protect you from the radioactive iodine level. But yet nobody in government wanted to tell us that. Also, since 9/11, there was a major research project with the U.S. Army to protect our troops from radioactive fallout. And they had been doing almost 10 years worth of study, including human trials, on how to protect people from dirty bombs. They had all this data. Did we hear a peep about it from the government? Not a word. So I'm going to talk to you just a minute about tritium. Tritium is hydrogen. It's a gas. It's part of water. Tritium is produced every time there's a nuclear accident. And you're going to learn just a very simple understanding about human cells that very, very few scientists understand. The way in which your cells are working, which is important to getting their repair rate on up to 800 quadrillion times per second, depended upon three things. Depended upon mother's breast milk with a certain kind of protein called proline-rich protein that we can only get from breast milk or from whey, or maybe some algae that happen. We need minerals of all the different kinds of minerals, and we have to have a very special kind of water. Does anybody here know why we breathe oxygen? It produces energy, right? But what is its last thing that it does when we breathe in oxygen? It makes water. It makes water. It makes water. Water is huge. In order for this repair mechanism to do its thing 800 quadrillion times a second, and we don't drink it. We make it by breathing. If radioactive hydrogen is sitting inside the cell, when oxygen comes in, this is good oxygen now, I'm not talking about free radicals, I'm talking about just regular breathing. That makes water that's radioactive. And this vital system that repairs and conducts all the genetic mechanisms, all of the protein mechanisms for making new cells, healthy cells, the immune system, it just simply can't work and it collapses. What does radioactivity do? It produces hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide, which is an oxygen radical that is like burning inside the body. Once the particle of radioactivity, whether it's in the form of iodine, whether it's in the form of hydrogen, or any of the other key radioactive particles that we'll briefly mention here, it just sits there 24/7, 365, burning you. And your body has to somehow try to deal with it. That's the way out of the mess, but that's why that most people don't get out of the mess. It's not that easy to do if you don't know exactly how to do it. We can't regenerate with radioactive tritium in our body. We just can't do it. We're just fundamentally, our structure, our scaffolding is just too fragile when that happens. This is the reason, folks, when a baby is born, especially those who aren't being breastfed, in my opinion, why we see them drop like flies, not only during an accident, but also if they live within 5 miles of a nuclear power plant that produces these as part of normal operations. Tritium is produced as part of the legally allowable amount of radiation that these nuclear power plants have to release. They have no choice. That's why they build the huge stacks. The big, huge concrete stacks that you've seen on pictures, to try to get it spread out. It doesn't. The problem is that if the child is under 5 years of age, their risk for leukemia goes up to 220% above what it should be. And that's worldwide. They've done this study now 3 times with over 200 different nuclear power plant sites. And in every single case, if the child was under 5 years of age, and they lived there long enough, from say when they were first born, they suffered 200 times the rate of leukemia that other kids who did live there got. That's how powerful tritium is. Tritium has a half-life of 12.5 years, meaning it has a biological whack, a punch, for 120 years. It's a 10-fold factor. This thing here they're talking about with biological half-life means something different. It means the amount of time it takes the body to get it out on its own. And on average, it takes a little over a year, almost 2 years to get out once it's in. We can take that out a lot quicker with some of the nutritional remedies that we now know about. We're talking about iodine. Iodine is what everyone heard about. Everyone wants you to think only about taking iodine, because then we don't have to worry about explaining all this other stuff to you, making you confused, because you know, you're not smart enough. You don't have a PhD in physics, so you guys don't even worry about this stuff. We'll worry about it for you. Give me a break. Iodine, although it only has a half-life of 8.5 days, it has a biological punch for over 80 to 90 days. During that time, once it's in your body, it just burns that thyroid gland until it is damaged. That damage stays there indefinitely and causes a very high level of leukemias and thyroid cancer to show up 5-10 years later. It doesn't happen right away. But the first wave is death from pneumonia and influenza. And that's what we saw. In April and May, when pneumonia and influenza death rates were supposed to be dropping, we saw a dramatic spike. The season for influenza starts about December 1st and ends about approximately the end of March. So now we saw a huge spike occur when it shouldn't have. And that's because the thyroid was weakened, and the immune system has to have the thyroid to produce enough hormone in order for the white blood cells to keep bacteria at bay. Normal bacteria and normal virus that we're going to be exposed to. It doesn't have any defense on it. Besides tritium, these are the main ones that we're worried about. There was a gentleman here who was talking about the releases in Ohio that I wasn't familiar with plutonium and uranium. Plutonium is a very, very heavy metal, and it is able to cause lung cancer about 10 years after exposure. If you look at this under tissue samples, when the particle lands into part of your lung, it just sits there for a long, long time periods, and it does this burning effect in the radius around it. And you can see these like spikes all around it where the tissue's been utterly destroyed. So we see a lot of lung cancers today because of that. The uranium is notorious for shutting down the kidneys. We have a lot of kidney disease now that's spiked here in the country over the last 30 years. Strontium gets into the bone and helps to cause leukemia. Cesium is a replacement for potassium in the body, which means it has effects anywhere, everywhere. And the last one is iodine, which isn't just important for thyroid function. The human female breast tissue needs about 3 milligrams of iodine a day. That's 3 milligrams a day just to stay healthy. The thyroid only needs 50 micrograms. So if you were to conduct experiments with rats trying to figure out how to cure breast cancer, the only way you can give rats breast cancer is to radiate them. You can't give them cancer through chemicals. So you radiate them, they get breast cancer, and then you figure out how to try to cure it. Back about 1980, a group of epidemiologists wanted to find out women living within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant. What was the rate of breast cancer compared to the rest of the people? Has anyone seen these studies before? You've seen them. Excellent. So here was the bending of science again. These two expert epidemiologists came out and said, our studies show that 18% of the women population in the United States live within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant. And yet, they are responsible. They account for 55% of the breast cancer in this country. 18% versus 55%? Why are we giving money to all these American cancer societies and everything else trying to cure breast cancer if they're not dealing with radiation? Okay, well this alarmed, of course, everyone. And the scientists got under attack that their data wasn't good, it was skewed this way, it wasn't a large enough sample, all kinds of excuses. They finally hired, the CDC finally hired another top epidemiologist. He decided to take out a vital data point for some arbitrary reason. But still, he shouldn't have taken that out, but he did. That dropped the rate down to 33% of all known cancers here in the United States. Still, 18% of all women live within 100 miles of nuclear power plants, and yet they are responsible for 33% of all breast cancer rates? That's cause and effect, right there. So the iodine, good iodine, is very, very vital to keep the human breast tissue alive, and unfortunately it's not in our diet. The reason why I think that we have seen over 14,500 children and other human adults here in North America die, what it looks like that they died as a direct result from Fukushima. Let me just say that we won't know for sure until 3 years out, but the trend is clear. The trend says that it looks like at least 14,500 people in North America died from Fukushima. That's the trend. CDC data. It looks as though that the Japanese have not quite shown that they were as hard hit right now with the first wave. Can anybody offer why that might be? So the first thing that happened was the winds were going out to ocean. But they had waited another week, all the winds shifted, they started going back to where Tokyo went. So the explosion occurred at the perfect timing issue, at least for the initial bangs. But there's another reason, that's a good reason, that's an excellent reason, but there's one other reason. The Japanese consume, that's right, they eat lots of iodine. Okay, and Kelvin pulls out a lot of other radioactive particles in addition to neutralizing radioactive iodine. Okay, they eat a ton of them. On average, they eat up to 100 times more iodine every day compared to what we do. So they have more protection. That's the reason why the first wave, we haven't seen the numbers yet out of Japan. However, I happen to also know that they're suppressing the data just like the Soviets did after Chernobyl. After Chernobyl, the Kremlin made it illegal to report any radiation sickness whatsoever for 3.5 years. That data's gone. We don't have it. It took 5 or 6 epidemiologists who were rushing to go through every hospital, every clinic in the region. It took them years, and go through the records one by one to figure out what the real death rate was. We'll get into that in just a minute. Cesium, as I mentioned here, in addition to iodine and strontium, it's a metal that tends to want to replace potassium in the body. Potassium is vital for probably more functions than just about any other metal or mineral in the body. At the cell level, it is what associates with this protein that I talked about, the proline-rich protein, and it starts a pumping action. Potassium is positively charged, and the proline-rich protein from mama's breast milk is negatively charged. Positive attracts negative, and they do this all day long, causing the cell to work. That's why your cells work. It's a huge part of how cells function. Very simple. Positive attracts a negative. Cesium replaces potassium in the body. So it's particularly nasty. And we saw all kinds of permanent defects and crippling effects in the children of Chernobyl well, the numbers are still being gathered, but we'll show those numbers in a second. Just absolutely staggering what's happening. So we're worried about cesium. It comes in 2 different forms. We're worried about strontium. We're worried about iodine. We're worried about tritium. And if we look at just the amount of cesium that was likely released at Fukushima, it was 100 times greater than Chernobyl. I'm leading up to something here. You can see it was a lot bigger what happened at Fukushima than at Chernobyl. Okay, so at first there was a lot of suppression about what the real numbers of release were. And we can hook on to any one radioactive particle. In the case of cesium-137, that's what that stands for, 137 CS. it was at least 2 times greater than what they originally reported. I can't imagine what it will be in about a year from now. Will it be 3, 4 times higher? I'm sure it will be. What the Japanese government in their wisdom decided to do is to collect all the radioactive debris in the northern half of Japan, collect it, bring it down to the south of Tokyo, and burn it. There's only one way that can make sense. Otherwise, it's just craziness. It could just be craziness. There's only one way that makes sense. Can you imagine the lawsuits that are going to happen about 10 to 15, 20 years from now? That the Japanese taxpayer is going to have to pay for it? Because TEPCO won't be able to. That's the company that had the nuclear power plant. I'm thinking, and those of us that have been involved with this are just thinking that maybe there's a more sinister motive here. Because it just otherwise doesn't make any sense. If you needed a control group of Japanese who weren't exposed to radiation to compare to the amount of leukemias and thyroid cancers that happen in the West, you would go to the south of Tokyo as the control group. But if you asked for that control group to make their cancer rates increase, then it would skew the fact that there was any big difference that happened to the north. It's the only thing that makes sense. I can't believe they would try to do that, but it just is the only thing that actually makes sense. On top of that, Japan has signed an international treaty not to dump radioactive waste in the ocean. So where are they dumping it? In Tokyo Bay. It's not international water. All that seaweed that the Japanese eat to stay healthy, it's all contaminated. All that sushi that they eat to stay healthy, which is a great raw food source, it's all contaminated now. And it doesn't take much. We're going to learn here in a second that the lower amount of radiation is more toxic than the higher amount of radiation. Who here has ever heard that before? Thank you. What's that called? Thank you. Boy, that's...
Oh, what?
This is exciting. We'll cover it. Thank you. We got this is happening. Nobody in the last few classes knew about this. Now it's starting to increase. The word's getting out. Less radioactivity is more toxic than higher amounts of radiation over a significant range. You have to go up way high before you become more lethal than at the lower levels. It's called the cacao. Okay, so all radiation is cumulative. We now know that out of the 104 operational nuclear power plants here in the United States, 75% of them have leaked regularly radioactive hydrogen, and probably a whole bunch of others. Of the 25% of those nuclear power plants here in the United States, they are vulnerable to the same catastrophe that happened at Fukushima. How? Because they're downstream from a dam or from a major flooding area. That's what destroyed the TEPCO plant in Fukushima. It wasn't the earthquake, it was the tidal wave. It sent all their equipment offline. 25% of our nuclear power plants are the same danger zone. This data came out of the U.S. government, and they suppressed it. They wouldn't release it to the public. Because of my good contacts, I was able to find it. Does anyone here know Arnie Gunderson? Good, okay. Arnie Gunderson and I have gotten to be good friends, and he gets these inside business information that are just absolutely startling. Let's hold that question. Okay, the question was, how do we measure the cumulative effects? Okay, this is a good question. This is what I talked about earlier, that these nuclear power plants, just a normal operation, are causing 220% increase in leukemia rates for children under 5. Verified 3 separate studies. This is the most recent one. Over 200 different nuclear power plants across the world. Now, as I repeated earlier, the Chernobyl catastrophe claimed at least 16,500 lives the immediate 4 months after it occurred in the United States. The possibility of that being due to something other than Chernobyl is 1 in 1 billion. I said that. The Fukushima catastrophe had a total amount of fuel that was exposed to detonation or to destruction at least 7 times more than the amount of fuel at Chernobyl. In the case of cesium-137, which is a really dangerous radioactive particle, it's up to 100 times more radioactive cesium was available for it to be destroyed at Fukushima. We think that 100% of it was vaporized at Fukushima. We're pretty sure that it was. They're keeping the numbers down really low. There's no justification for that. That cesium goes airborne. We got a lot of it over here. But first chart I showed you, a lot of that relates to cesium. So far we know that at least 14,000 suspicious deaths are related to something that we shouldn't have seen. We should not have seen these 14,000 extra deaths during the first 4 months after Fukushima. Now, here are the different waves. We see the initial is the immune compromise, which causes death from pneumonia and influenza. That occurs within the first year. Because of the food supply and how radioactivity goes through the food chain in the cycle, and then we're at the top of the food chain, so we accumulate most of what's in our foods in terms of contaminants. We can expect these immune waves to keep coming and coming and coming, although they'll morph into other diseases. Sometime at the 5 to 10 year mark, we'll start to see an escalation in leukemias and the thyroid cancers. Then the solid cancers, anywhere from 15 years out to 60 years. Now, this does not include the chronic degenerative diseases. Now, what I want to say to you is that our problem about premature aging is that almost everything translates itself into the production of hydrogen peroxide or something very similar to hydrogen peroxide. Therefore, our body has to have systems to quench that. That's how we stop our aging process. It doesn't matter what disease you have. If you have cancer or diabetes or heart disease, it winds up being that free radical as well. The secret to the fountain of youth is to put that system so efficient back online again that you get way ahead of that production of that hydrogen peroxide. The hydrogen peroxide is manufactured constantly, 24/7, 365, at 10 times the amount if you have any other pollution inside your body. They combine. So the detoxification aspect has to go way beyond just taking kelp and bentonite clay or edible clay. We have to go through a complete body wash, which we can do. We can do that with, especially with smoothies. That's the source of chronic degenerative diseases, why the escalation in the United States has gone up through the roof over the past 40 years. In my view, it's because of the radiation that we've been exposed to. Because it amps up everything else that causes us to age quickly or to get sick. It just amps it up. We need to find a different source of energy production. It needs to be cheaper. We don't need to pay more money. I'm working on that too. This is what I was saying about less is more lethal. Back in 1970, a Canadian physicist showed, quite to his amazement, that the lower you go with radiation, if it's on all the time, the more lethal it is to cells. Why? 2 reasons. Number one, when radiation is given in high doses, it produces a lot of free radicals. And when you have a whole bunch of free radicals all being produced at the same time, they hit each other and they cancel each other out. They go neutral. The second reason why that this occurs is because we have a repair mechanism, right? We've been talking about this 800 quadrillion times per second repair mechanism. It's actually quite a bit faster than that. It doesn't get triggered to go into hyperdrive at the lower levels. it stays basically turned off to handle any new stress. We have to hit it with more radiation for it to kick into overdrive. These young kids don't have a chance. Now, I predicted that we're going to have in the world, particularly Japan, but also here in North America, no less than 7 times the number of people that died as a result of the Chernobyl incident. But there were 6 times more people in Japan than there were around the Chernobyl incident. He said earlier that the initial explosions, that the wind was going out to oceans, so it came over here to North America. That's true. But there were fluctuations, and eventually, over the next 3 weeks, that wind changed and thoroughly dosed Tokyo. We've gone back through the wind studies. So Tokyo and Japan did get dosed. They got dosed heavily. We know that they were dosed at least 4 to 6 times greater than Chernobyl. That's according to official information. So I'm predicting about 7 times more death and 7 times more injury than compared to Chernobyl. It's a pretty reasonable figure. But we already have several agencies that get pretty darn close to my forecast. This last one down there on the very bottom is particularly chilling. I believe that means 3 trillion lethal doses were released. Now, it's a matter of toxicology in the field of radiation that it doesn't matter how dilute you make the radiation. A given amount of radiation will cause a given amount of cancer. That's why Dr. Sciampa is rating it this way. It just takes longer if it's been diluted, if it's been spread out, if it went this way instead of that way. It just takes longer. It still comes back around to cause the cancer. And in no small measure because of the food chain magnifying out enough of the food chain into fish and into dairy products where we're eating. So we have to take this on. We don't have a choice.
Just from last time.
Okay, so as I said, Chernobyl, we now know, had a little under 1 million deaths during the first 20 years. We'll probably see another million over the next 80 years related to Chernobyl. We had at least 8 million disabilities, and these were not regular disabilities. These were crippling effects. And as I was saying, we have 6 times more of the population, 7 times more radioactive fallout. I think I had those numbers here, sorry. So we have about up to 42 times the lethal possibility compared to Chernobyl. But to keep it conservative, I'd take the 7. We know from studies that were done by Marco Calican out of Boston, who has one of the only certified labs in the country that can analyze all kinds of radioactive particles, depending upon what sampling that is taken. Getting in some pine needles, we do a sample on pine needles in the Northwest. That Tokyo had, it was closer to 20 hot particles that people were breathing in every single day that are going to stay in them, in their lungs, for maybe years during the month of April. So every day during the month of April, approximately 20 hot particles went in and didn't come out. They're just burning the whole time. We had half that amount in Seattle. And California got hit worse than we did. So that's what everyone was breathing here in California during those times. Okay, so what I've done in this book here is to document so you can trust the fact that these data points are accurate. Where I interpret or where I make assumptions, I clearly state that these are my assumptions based upon, and I put the hard data in. And then finally I get into exactly the science of what is known to undo this. And this, fortunately or unfortunately, was earned by trial by fire with the Chernobyl kids, the children in Chernobyl. That's how we figured out a lot of this stuff. But we also had some great information from studies done by the U.S. Army. This is how all the long-lived people do it. The first thing is that up there in the blue, you see the life of the cell is immortal. It is the fluid in which it floats that degenerates. That's by the Nobel Prize winner Alexis Carrel. He grew chicken heart tissue consistently without it having any sort of health problems for 34 years in a petri dish. And he did it through a system of all three of those first top ones. He detoxified it completely every 48 hours because it was a very thin slice of tissue, even though it was contracting. It was hard tissue, so it contracted. It was exposed to maximal amount of oxygen. That makes the water inside the cell where it needs to be. He only gave it embryonic food factors, which is what all the long-lived people have an abundance of. That's what's the difference between our diet and all these books that you see today written on what type of diet is the best diet. They're not talking about embryonic food factors. That's what he used. And then Alexis Carrel had witnessed, he's one of the few, he's the only Nobel Prize winner in medicine who ever witnessed not one, but two authenticated miracles. They were both at Lourdes. In 1902, he was asked to replace somebody who couldn't go to take care of a trainload of sick people. And he was meticulous at taking notes of some of the more sick people. In particular, this 23-year-old woman who had tuberculosis in her stomach. She was about 7 months pregnant with tuberculosis too. Okay? She was in coma. Her vital signs were almost, she should have been dead. And he watched her for 24 hours on this train ride until they got to Lourdes, taking notes. 4 other physicians conducted the examination. They had all treated lots of cases of tubercular peritonitis in their careers. They knew what they were seeing. Her first dose of the water on the belly caused her searing heat pain. Within 45 minutes, the entire tooth mass had dissolved. 100%. She got up and walked away. She was 23. She lived until she was 58 years of age. Alexis Carrel had to see that in order to know how to grow his tissue. In 1912, when he started the experiment, he had been failing for 5 years to grow tissue indefinitely in a petri dish. He couldn't figure out what the ingredients were until he thought, oh, maybe I can get some of that special water. But now he's in New York. By the way, he got kicked out of France for reporting on this miracle. He was a professor of anatomy at Lyon Medical College. They ran him out of the country. He flees to Quebec. University of Chicago finds out about him. They hire him. He then is hired by the Rockefeller Institute in New York to try to figure out how to do organ transplants. The first thing they needed to do was to find out how to sew blood vessels together. That's where he won his Nobel Prize in 1912. The same year. But then they had to grow tissue indefinitely in order to know how to preserve the organ long enough that they could do the transplant without dying. So I have 0 time left, so let me just finish with this. He witnessed a second miracle in 1908. An 18-month-old baby, born blind, water from Lourdes put over the eyes, the baby could see. That's the 4th pillar. We call that psychoneurosematics. These are the 4 pillars of human regeneration. We can all do it. I hope you find out more about what we're up to. And God bless you all. I'll be here.